beyond. Michael Schabas is our visitor today, and we were comparing notes about our experiences in different parts of the world, in particular about Nigeria. And he was going to hold back the stories until the talk, so I'm intrigued to see what he says. We've only met a couple of times, Mike, and so I don't know as much as the information I've got in front of me. He's a managing director of Eco Rail Limited, which is currently developing the Lagos Blue Line mass transit system under a 25-year-old PPP concession. And he's been asked today to explain this project and how he sees it offering technical as well as urban development. I use the word solutions, obviously. And he will discuss the challenges and advantages of working in an emerging economy such as Nigeria. Mike has a pedigree which is quite impressive to say the least, particularly in the field of mega transport projects. He has been involved in the last 30 years with rail and metro systems. He's been involved in different sides. I think it's quite interesting, from the property side and the manufacturing side, and from the operator side as well, and also as an investor, if I remember correctly, a personal investor at that. During the privatisation of British Rail, he founded GP Railway Group, which operated the Anglia Railway franchise, and founded the Hull Trains GB Rail Freight and the Great Southern Railway in Australia. So he's been around. I didn't mean that in a derogatory way, Michael. Played key roles in the Vancouver SkyTrain, the London Jubilee Line extension, and the Channel Tunnel Rail Link, and I think that's where we first met Michael in terms of our research. He has a bachelor's degree in architecture. We won't hold that against him. Planners like architecture, really. And he's from the University of Toronto originally, which is the first degree, and a master's degree in transport planning from Harvard Kennedy School. What I typically do is to ask everyone to introduce themselves, so you know the audience, where they're from, and then you get some idea of how to pitch the talk. So, Hassan, if you just quickly, your name, where you're from, what program or what you're doing, so that Michael can put you in some kind of pigeonhole.
Hi, my name is Hassan. I'm from Lagos, Nigeria. I'm currently with the University of Architecture program.
And what's your specialty?
I just completed the Master's in Urban Infrastructure Planning.
Okay.
And my name is Yushin. I'm from China. I'm a PhD student in the MS School of Planning.
Okay. Where in China?
Chongqing.
Hello, my name is Maud Christophe. I'm from Montreal, and I'm one of the students in mega infrastructure planning and feasibility.
Hi, my name is Astrid Wood. I'm here in UCL in geography, and I'm writing at my PhD on BRT in South African cities.
Oh, okay.
So.
Okay. There's BRT in Lagos too.
Right. Well, that's all my questions in future.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Brian Garcia. I'm a PhD student in planning. I'm studying transport-led regeneration.
I'm Robin Hickman. I'm a lecturer here at the Roberts School of Planning and Transport.
Hi, I'm Iqbal Hamidin. I'm a researcher here at the Roberts School. I work on a project called Sintrain, which is about light rail and economic development.
I'm Carlos from Colombia. Currently, I'm master in infrastructure.
Hi, I'm John Ward. I'm a researcher with the Omega Center.
Chris from China, also the Omega Center in infrastructure here.
Sorry?
Omega infrastructure.
Okay.
I'm Vicky. I'm from China. I'm a student of mega infrastructure planning operation here.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Leila from China, and I'm doing the same master.
Okay.
Ian from Ireland, and I'm doing mega infrastructure masters as well.
Okay. Okay. Good.
I'll switch up on the mic. So
Well, it's all right. It's pretty good. Is that all right? Yeah. I don't like to do it all in the dark. I've had a pretty halfway through my career. I think I'm in my second half century, and I've done just about every kind of project in transport trains there is, which is really kind of neat, from all different sides. I've even been an investor and an owner when rail privatization happened again. And I'm currently a part investor, and I own a little bit of the Hamburg-Cologne Express. So if you're in Cologne and you want to take the train to Hamburg, and I've worked in about 25 countries. Spent a few years trying to learn Mandarin, actually, with the World Bank on some stuff in China, too. I'm Lagos Metro, I'm the managing director, but that takes about a third of my time. I'm currently involved in work in Canada with Via Rail, train company in Germany, some work in Britain to do with Stansted Airport and Crossrail as well. And I have a consulting firm that does a lot of stuff around and transport. So I get all sorts of opportunities coming in. People are emails are coming in every week from somewhere. People saying, "Are you interested in?" I mean, last week it was a Mauritius light rail project, and it was "Oh, great, let's go to Mauritius." And the week before that, it was a coal railway in Mozambique, and so on. So the first question one has to ask when you get these emails is this a serious project? Is it going to happen, or am I wasting my time? I want to get changed. Second, it's my computer, so I've got no excuse for not changing. Okay. Well, Lagos, people say, why Lagos? Why would you want to go to Lagos? Lagos is fantastic, really, because the projects I like most are urban metro projects. Vancouver SkyTrain was my first one. Jubilee Line Extension I had a lot to do with for Canary Wharf. I love urban metro projects because they let you reshape the city, or you get to rebuild the city around them. The only trouble is there aren't that many cities. I grew up in Toronto, and frankly, I never thought I'd work on a real interesting metro project because they were already, all the cities that needed them already had been built, at least in 1970. Luckily, I was wrong, and there's been lots that have been built since then. And Vancouver had a great 2 years on SkyTrain. But by the time I was finished, everything was in place. There was a big organization. There were developers building stuff around the stations. The technology was pretty much sorted out. And when I came here and did the Jubilee Line Extension, I worked for the Canary Wharf developers, and I got to draw the line on the map and say where the station should go first and so on. But then again, the bureaucracy took over, you know. And TfL is a pretty good bureaucracy as bureaucracies go, but, you know, I go to China and I did this World Bank tour of metro projects with them, and it was hard for me to add very much. I could say that I thought they were doing something wrong and so on, but then Lagos came on, and I get this email, the Lagos Transit Roadshow, they want to build a metro in Lagos, and I thought, gee, it's a city of 10 or 15 million people, nobody's quite sure. It's a 6-hour flight from London in the same time zone, and I actually like sleeping at home most of the time, but I don't mind 2 or 3 day trips. Trips to China are okay. Trip to Indonesia, you're talking 2 weeks away from home. It's a big chunk out of your life, you know. And I like to be home on Saturday morning to play tennis with my friends. So I thought, Lagos, wow, this is great. It's a big city that doesn't have a metro. It's got no bureaucracy in place. They haven't got a clue about the fare structure. They haven't really got a route plan. And they clearly have a need. And they speak English, which was good. And it's more or less British law, to the extent that they have laws. They do have laws much more than most people think. I go jogging on the streets of Victoria Island without any security, without any bodyguard. I leave my wallet in the hotel room. I really had no trouble there in 40 trips to Nigeria. The biggest hassle was getting a visa to go there. The people are friendly. 99% of the people would lay their life down to, well, I think maybe it's 80%, but anyway. Certainly, I mean, they make jokes about it. People make jokes about Nigerians. Nigerians make jokes about themselves. But I think the country has fantastic potential that has been held up by lack of government. And it has, in Lagos State, a government that is committed to do things. It's perhaps unfortunate that he's a lawyer and not an economist. There are paradigms of different countries. They say that America's run by lawyers. China's run by engineers, so they'll dam everything and build a railway to everywhere, but at least it'll get built. Germany's run by engineers, so they build everything, or army guys. So I told them to invade Russia, and they go and do it. Britain is run by classics graduates and economists, which is good, actually, and the results are pretty good. Nigeria is, unfortunately, still run by lawyers, more than economists, more than engineers. So they do tend to love debating things, and they think if they won the debate, they won the point, and the railway still hasn't got built. But in the case of the Blue Line, they said, okay, let's build 2 metro lines in the city. They dusted off a plan that was done in the 1980s, probably without much thought. and said, let's build the first 2 lines. The World Bank funded the initial study, but it's not really involved now. And they had launched a BRT scheme, which was successful. And when I went on my first trip, they took us to see the BRT. And that was very important because I saw this BRT running and I said, they've made this work. They can make something work. Something can actually happen in the city that is positive. And it's carrying 160,000 passengers a day. It's not the slickest BRT system in the world, but it does work. They, I think, thought that if you could build a BRT, then a rail system was going to be twice as complicated. It's about 100 times as complicated, and they're gradually discovering that. But nevertheless, things can be achieved. They also appointed 2 different groups of consultants, one for each line, the blue line and the red line, which was a good idea, because if one screws up, maybe the other one wouldn't. Maybe there would be some competition between them. And they adopted a dual contract structure, which is actually the structure that was used on the New York subway around 1900, which was basically saying the city will build the infrastructure, the private concessionaire will bring the trains, the signaling, and run the fare collection, hire all the staff, and run it for a period of time, paying rent, basically, for the infrastructure. And a similar structure has been used in Manila and in Sao Paulo in Brazil. And it's becoming the model that works. There's a lot of urban metro concession structures that have been shown not to work. Most of them don't work. But this is one structure that has been shown to work, and it can be quite successful. And that was the dual contract structure. I don't think anybody in Lagos that I met realized that it was a New York structure. I went to the road show. They did a road show where they went to Dubai and London. And I just turned up. I got an email. I turned up there. There were about 250 people there, 240 of whom were, well, you could tell were probably not English, just by looking around, and about 10 people who, I'm not sure they were lawyers or whatever. The governor spoke and seemed to know what he was talking about. The planner from CPCS Transcom spoke and sort of knew what he was saying. And then I decided I better ask the question, so the 250 people knew who I was. And I just said, what are you going to do about integrated fares? Because this is key. If you build a metro and it's not integrated with the buses, you won't get many riders. They said, oh, we're going to have an integrated fare system. It's all going to be the responsibility of the concessionaire. I thought, well, that's the right answer. So I sat down. Discussions ended. And the coffee break happened, and I just sat there and waited 10 minutes. And sure enough, somebody wandered over to me, who was a Harvard-educated, Harvard MBA, ex-McKinsey Nigeria, who moved back to start a merchant bank in Nigeria. And he said, we're putting a consortium together to bid for this. Are you interested? And I said, well, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. And he introduced me a few weeks later to his backer, who's got enough money to play this game, because I said, you're going to need more than $1 million or $2 million to be the concessionaire for this. I mean, we're looking at $500 million of capex for the rolling stock, the signaling, and so on. And I said, something like 10% of that you're going to need to come up with. And I checked them out. We got lawyers involved. We got bankers involved. And it was, you know, as I said, maybe I'm naive, but I haven't seen any. I haven't had to deal with anybody who's corrupt. I haven't been asked to pay a bribe. Haven't seen anybody do anything corrupt like that. There are a couple of people on the other side I kind of suspect are probably getting some money from somebody, but that's, I'd like to say no worse than I would experience in Ontario or British Columbia, where these things happen too. That's the 7-line metro scheme done in the 1980s, I think. I don't think the person who did it knew what they were doing. It was a set of colored drawings with crayons, but the key lines are the blue line. This is downtown Lagos Island, and you know, it's like New York or something. It's a city that's very physically constrained. Downtown Lagos is not like Manhattan. There are a few 10-story buildings, and the elevators even sometimes work. But basically, it's a sprawling 1- and 2-story city, but it's constrained by the sea, by mangrove swamps, and by the lagoon. Into really only 3 corridors. East-west corridor here. This is the blue line is running along the Badagry corridor. North up the red line and the National Railway, Nigerian Railway, which runs up here. Well, doesn't really run. They run 1 train a day now, and for about 20 years they ran no trains, or 10 years they ran no trains at all. And then this corridor, which had nobody on it, I gather this is the Lekki corridor, which boomed in the 80s and 90s because the oil companies started locating out here. They put electricity, they built some roads, and it's full of lots of compounds for expats and wealthier middle-class Nigerians, the Lekki corridor. It's got a freeway system. The traffic is terrible. It's much due to mismanagement of the freeways. and the roads. You stop me if I'm saying anything you don't agree with. But it is a, Wilbur Smith, I think, did the freeways in the 70s and 80s. You know, they had money in the 70s and 80s, oil money, and they built a network of 6-lane freeways with junctions and flyovers. Some of them, from an urban design point of view, are terrible. Lagos Island has got a ring motorway around it. It's been badly maintained. The lights rarely work, but you also find a whole lane is out because of a giant pothole, like a whole lane. They let vendors sell stuff on the ramps, which causes more traffic congestion. The airport, from the airport to downtown, can take 30 minutes. It can take 4 hours, depending on the traffic. So anyway, that's the blue line. The plan on the blue line is basically an expressway that was built here in the 70s. It's a 4-lane expressway, but usually had 1 lane functioning in each direction. It's being rebuilt as a 10-lane expressway with room down the middle for tracks. Not a bad idea. I mean, it's not the ideal place to build a metro, but the corridor's there. The alternative of building it through the neighborhoods on either side would be impossible because you'd have to clear thousands of people out of the way. The interesting thing about Lagos is that, generally speaking, it doesn't have unplanned squatter settlements. Generally, the areas have mapped roads and so on. They're not usually paved, but the residential areas are generally have streets and so on. And most people travel in these minibuses that they go back and forth in. I don't know why it's not working. The buttons on it. It's generally minibuses, 15-year-old ex-German minivans painted yellow. Carrying 16 passengers in space that you would probably think was comfortable for 8. The other line was the red line, which was to go up along the corridor with the National Railway. And much higher population and much higher traffic. But Darrell Handassa, who were the consultant for that, just assumed that the Nigerian railways would cooperate with them and let them lay their tracks alongside because there was space. And I thought, as soon as I heard that, I thought, this happens all the time, and it was like asking British Rail and London Underground to cooperate between Canning Town and Stratford. They didn't, they didn't need to build extra tracks for the Jubilee line alongside British Rail. They just wouldn't cooperate, and it happens in the States. So it was very naive to think that the federal government would cooperate with the state government. They're from different political parties. And anyway, the idea that you could run a metro alongside a freight railway that had about 10 level crossings in a city like Lagos was just unfathomable, because the barriers would be down all the time. We're talking about a 2-minute headways on a metro. You have to be fully grade separated. Okay. They even had plans for ferry services, which I thought were completely unrealistic. This was the Lamada, the transit authority that was set up. I mean, a ferry boat from here going here and then up a little creek. I mean, it would probably take 2 hours to go from here to here. These are, this is done by planners who are not necessarily practical about things. A BRT now, where again they got a map out and they just draw the lines they could think of. This is the one that actually runs. Up the yellow one is this one that carrying 160,000 passengers a day. This is the one up what they call the Third Mainland Bridge, which is really an expressway out over the lagoon, where they painted 2 lanes and bus lanes, but it's not respected or used. But there is a sort of reasonably high frequency bus service on it. This is the expressway. Notice there's no bus route shown, no BRT route shown on it, because of course that's going to be the railroad. But it was only after we got more involved and we discovered they were building the expressway with room for BRT lanes. And we said, hey guys, wait a minute. Either you can have a railway, but that's the BRT, that's the existing BRT. And you can see it's just separated with concrete curves, and the vehicles have to cross to get in and out. Cars have to cross, but it still does make a massive improvement. People have journey time savings of an hour or more in their commute. It's a flat fare, 50 and 100 an hour, I think it is, depending on how far you're going, 2 stages. Run as a private concession, basically by a consortium of the minibus drivers, who are called the Transport Union, which is a semi-criminal, I can probably say here, semi-criminal organization. It's not like South Africa, they don't shoot people, but Governor Fashola gets a lot of support from them. So I have to be careful what I'm saying, be very careful not to get on the wrong side of the mic. They're not a criminal organization because they've never been forced in a position to behave in a criminal way. In that respect, they would. I mean, just keep clear of them, basically. But they're running it, and they run it and it's successful, and it's 200,000 passengers a day, very profitable, 30% IRR. The state provided a guarantee or something like that for the capital to buy the buses, which are, you stop me if I'm saying anything, if I got my facts wrong. Because, please, it's, no reporters here or anything, right? That was the drawing they showed us of the Badagry Expressway. Now, this is what they call light rail, that they were expecting 300,000 passengers a day on the corridor. And I thought, ooh, 300,000 passengers a day, that sounds kind of like heavy rail, actually, because that's like the Northern Line. And that doesn't sound like light rail to me. But the pictures look more like trams, and it's low floor. And this is the expressway that's 10 lanes, but it's 2 lanes collector lanes, 2 lanes express lanes, which they said might be full, plus a BRT lane in each direction, which is not such a great thing to have if you're trying to make money running this. So I said, you don't really need both. On the other hand, I kind of like this because this wastes the 3rd lane of the expressway. I mean, if you know your traffic engineering, the 3rd lane, a 3-lane expressway's got twice the capacity of a 2-lane expressway. So I'd rather have this lane out of use or something like that, preferably with blocked and broken down cars. And the collector lanes here are shown as being one way, but in reality, if you look at the street systems in the surrounding areas, they're not very coherent. And this probably needs to be 2-way, otherwise people will have to make very, very long detours to get in and out. So it's actually a rail system in the middle of a 6-lane expressway, which sounds better. And one of the key bridges, they're not rebuilding, they're squeezing it through anyway because they want to save some money, so it's only going to be 4 lanes. So there's still going to be traffic jams on the expressway, which is good for the railway. I mentioned the dual contract structure. They awarded a contract to China Civil Engineering Construction Company to build the infrastructure. They've only done it for half, actually. They haven't done the second half yet. And they're funding it directly from Lagos State Government, and they've got a bond issue to raise some cash for it. They're building track, roadbed structures, stations. We reviewed the specs. We had some comments. We got them to make some design changes. They were going to use Chinese rail. We said, well, nothing wrong with Chinese rail, but we're going to have trouble raising money for this if the standards are not built to UIC standards. They said, no problem, let's switch and use UIC standard rail. We've got an engineer actually down there this week because there's still issues about whether they're tamping the ground properly, things like this. But basically, the simple infrastructure is being done conventionally. We have to get the trains, we have to build the depot, we have to put in the control systems and the fare collection and so on. Which is fun. Now that's one of the stations. As I said, we're the concessionaire, Echo Rail, and that's one of our trains. And that's a station. Big things over the expressway. What did I get them to do? This is me as they are. It's still showing the stairs down to the BRT stop, which is a bit of a problem. But I got them to make this bridge really wide, 7 meters wide. You could actually put shops on it. I got them to put a knockout panel at the end so it can plug into buildings on the other side. So although this is going to be a metro line down the middle of a 6-lane expressway, it has the potential at each place to have integrated urban development, which is, hopefully, not for Singapore is not the ideal city, but it's a better model than Lagos is now, and it's better than say on the Beijing on the 3rd ring road, where you hike out of these stations up long hikes to the surface, and then you have to cross another road to get into the shopping mall. And I grew up in Toronto, where you get off the train, you go up 1 flight of stairs, or even no flight of stairs, and you're right into the mall. And in a climate, Nigeria is actually, Lagos, surprisingly, is actually a more pleasant climate than I expected. I thought it was a steam bath, but it's not like Bangkok or Singapore. You can walk outside during the day. It's not that hot. So there is the potential to have that. That was the advertisement. I think it was in the Economist, actually. That is a picture of all the people who worked on the bid. We were asked to do a bid. We had our funder, who's a wealthy Nigerian, who we formed EcoRail. We had lawyers, bankers, engineers, economists. We did our own traffic forecast, because the traffic forecasts that they had done were not really, they made no sense. And we actually came up with a similar total number, but they had a very high peaking ratio. They'd done a survey, for $5,000. They basically went door to door and asked people, ring the doorbell, who answers the phone, the door, well, somebody who isn't working, say, does anybody here commute? Yes, my husband. When does he go in? Oh, he goes in every morning at 7 in the morning. When does he come home? Comes home at 6 o'clock at night. Does he do anything else during the day? No. So guess what? Very high morning and evening peaks and empty all day long. And that would have required a fleet of about 200 cars. We said, well, actually, there seems to be traffic all day long. We did a survey of the minibus passengers. It cost us about $50,000. We sent people to the bus stops and interviewed people, said, where do you come from, where do you go to, how much did you pay? So we knew really what people are actually paying now, and got much more confidence that yes, we could get almost 300,000 passengers a day, but with a peak link load of about 10,000, which is much better. So we don't have to buy an enormous fleet of trains that will be empty all day. They'll be busy all day long. I guess this is pretty straightforward stuff, the project lifestyle. What is the vision? Do the numbers appear to stack up? I looked at this project and I said, yeah, the numbers on both lines stack up, the red line and the blue line, but on the red line you'll never get permission to take over the corridor, and actually 4 years later the red line has moved nowhere because they haven't got the corridor. But the blue line, the numbers stack up. Detailed studies, the devil is in the detail. What kind of trains are going to use for this? The consultants who strangely come from Canada who did it said, oh, we assume you'll use diesel multiple units because electricity is not reliable in Nigeria. And I said, wow, this is going to be a pretty intensive DMU operation with a train every 3 or 4 minutes, a diesel, 4-car diesel train. And actually they were talking 8-car diesel trains. That'd be the most intensive diesel operation in the world. And I thought, maybe it's cheaper to just build a power station and have no electricity, because that's what they did. The first power stations were built in New York and London to run trams and metros. We started to cost it, and actually, I'll come back to that, but we actually found a very easy way to find the right answer on that one. We have to get a concession agreement signed, we're very close to that, and then we have to raise the rest of the money, and then we have to deliver it, which is, yes, almost the easy part. Key thing is that we're led by operators, not manufacturers. Very often these projects are led by companies that want to sell trains. Bombardier, Siemens, and so on. The Bangkok project was led by Siemens and some big construction companies, which expected and did make their money selling trains and pouring concrete. But they were left with an operation that was couldn't be operated efficiently, didn't achieve the traffic and the revenues that was expected. Same, in fact, applied to the Channel Tunnel. The Channel Tunnel was promoted by contractors who all got paid. Costain, Balfour Beatty, Taylor Woodrow, they got their money. The shareholders were left with something that didn't generate the profits that were expected. And if you go and look at it now, you say, they built this track so close to the end of the tunnel and it's reduced our capacity for the next 1,000 years by 20%, just some little design details. You make mistakes in the railway metro projects, you live with them forever. And if you talk to London Underground, they can take you around every station on the line and show you what was done wrong 100 years ago that they just can never change. A curve that was put in the wrong place, things like that. We did a bottom-up business plan to work out how to do it. We've worked out every staff person we need, what everybody's going to cost. There's a lot of guesswork involved in it. I don't know exactly what I'm going to have to pay a train driver in Lagos. I need guys who are going to turn up for work at 5 in the morning, be there, that I can trust driving a train with 1,000 passengers on it that's worth, $5 or $10 million. I'm going to have a control system so he can't crash into the guy in front. But he's still got to work the doors and things like that. He could still do his job wrong, or he could still not show up for work. How much do I have to pay? I know it's more than the guy who picks me up at the airport, and it's less than the guy who's flying the plane. We are committed to delivering first world safety and comfort. Anybody here been on the Delhi Metro? Yeah. And you get on the Delhi Metro, you feel like you're in Singapore. Outside in Delhi, it feels like India. China, you expect that, but in India, it's a real shock. You walk around in India, there's cows on the streets and beggars and so on, and there's dirt everywhere. You go into the metro station, and suddenly, it's just like China or Toronto. And that's our plan for Lagos. So we're going to deliver first world safety and comfort. The last one I guess I should mention is something called a RAP, which we have to finance the project, and then there's a risk. People are always concerned about the technical risk. You're buying trains, you're buying signaling, you're buying track. What if it doesn't all work together? And everybody thinks there's a Jubilee line, which didn't work when it opened, the Dawkins Road that didn't work when it opened, the Channel Tunnel didn't work. They want to see you with a single contractor whose job is to provide everything. We aren't actually doing that, but we're coming close. I mentioned traffic forecasts were optimistic. They weren't so optimistic, it was more that the profile was unrealistic. They had a very simplistic idea to fare regulation. They just said, you can charge. I said, will the fares be regulated? That was one of the questions they asked at the roadshow. And he said, yes, but at a level that won't matter, it'll be so high. So then we got the documents, and they said, yep, fare maximum 180 naira. So I asked the question, so is that 180 naira from end to end? Yeah. What if it's 2 lines? Is that 360 naira? Oh, hadn't thought of that. And I said, and, you know, what can we charge less than the peak? You know, I said we should be charging fares by distance. And they said, and we said, what if it's integrated with a feeder bus? Hadn't thought of that either. And they also said it should escalate with inflation. And I said, well, actually, that's not right. It should escalate with wages. And if you know London, because I mean, this is a classic problem. Everyone thinks prices should go up with general price inflation, but public transport is like a haircut. It's a labor-intensive product, and the quality of it goes up as people get richer too. People spend the same proportion of their income now on their haircuts as they did 100 years ago. Because the barber, he's not going to live down the street from you, but he's going to live in the same city. And you probably want a nicer haircut because you can afford it. And it's the same with a lot of quality-sensitive consumer goods. And you want the quality of this to rise your income. And TfL's policy, and you can ask them effectively, is that right now fares go up at 3% above inflation. And that effectively reflects that, do you know Shashi Verma? You talk to, he's the guy who runs the fare policy. He's the guy who sends you your email on your Oyster card when you have auto top up. And he'll tell you it's a haircut. And you know, so we're gonna have fares that escalate. We've got, we think, quite a clever structure of how our fare structure works. Remember, it's a 25-year concession. We have to have a contract with the government that lasts 25 years, that anticipates all the changing circumstances in 25 years, that 25 years down the line, they're still going to feel that they're getting a good deal from this private company, albeit we're a Nigerian private company. We're not a bunch of Canadians or anything. But, you know, that we are delivering a good public service to them. And we have to be able to persuade our bankers that the city government of Lagos is going to respect our contract. And otherwise they're not going to loan us. They're going to invest the money we need. I mentioned, I think, these other points. Okay, that's the route. Phase 1, which they are just about finished building, goes from National Theatre to Mile 2. The governor is getting his picture taken, saying it'll be finished by the end of 2013. We're sort of being quiet because we're saying yes, but really a metro is not a lot of use without any trains on it. And this is too short to have any viable commercial operation. And anywhere the depot is out here, you can't run a train service without a depot. So we've said if they give us that infrastructure, we can have a single train running back and forth on one track as a kind of demonstration to show people that trains can run in Lagos, and we can do that maybe by 2014. We need them to build this, and then we can run trains all the way from here to here, and then once they have a bit more money, they go to the rest of the way to there. Effectively, what they're building now is Camden Town to Tufnell Park, which isn't that much use. And we did point, they said, oh, but people can get off the bus here and take our train and then get on a bus. And I said, well, that might work if there was space for the buses to turn around, but actually the bus they get off here would probably be the same bus that picked them up here. Or unless it was stuck in traffic, or they'd see it go past them while they were on the train. I don't know. Because this is, remember, an expressway. It's an expressway without a lot of ramps. Next is traffic forecasts. Yeah, those are our guys doing the surveys. And you can see the traffic forms on the red line are fantastic. More than 500,000 passengers a day. And what's interesting is, of course, the volumes don't peak in the city center, because Lagos isn't like that. It's not Manhattan or London. Most people are traveling around between different places in the suburbs. The biggest volumes on the blue line are right here, because Lagos State University is out here. There's some big markets here. There's some industrial stuff along here. And that's fun. I mean, so the fact that it only makes it as far as Camden Town doesn't really matter, because most people aren't going to Lagos Island anyway. And we can run a good bus service, actually. We worked out from here to here. We can run a really good BRT service the last bit of the way. Key technical strategies. We're using a wireless signaling system, so there's no signal cables to steal. Now, not that that should be such a big problem when we're in the middle of an expressway behind a big fence. So, you know, it's not like the north of England. It shouldn't, but we're not going to have any cabling really along the tracks. We're going to use electric trains, and we solved that, the technical choice very easily. I happen to know that Toronto is replacing a fleet of 30-year-old subway trains, which are great trains. They were the first fully air-conditioned, fully regenerative braking metro trains in the world. They've got aluminum bodies, riveted aluminum bodies on bolted steel frames, which means they last forever. And Toronto's been running them 70,000 miles a year, which is about a third of the mileage of most metro trains. So these trains have got another 50 years of life left in them. The main reason Toronto is getting rid of them, Toronto says they're getting rid of them because they want wider doors. The doors are 1.2 meters wide, and they want cars that have wider doors so people can load. The real reason is because Bombardier owns the Canadian government. Bombardier's got a factory in Thunder Bay, Ontario that doesn't get much work because they will build a metro car. The Chinese will sell you a metro car for $1.5 million, and Bombardier will build it for you in Thunder Bay, Ontario for $3 million. And that's what Toronto's paying for. So Toronto's getting new subway cars that look a lot like the old ones, actually. I should have put the picture. If you go on our website, you'll see there's a picture of me showing Governor Fashola around the Toronto yard, seeing these trains, and they had one of the new trains parked next to it. And he wanted to look at it. And it, you know, the main difference on the inside, the same windows, the same seats, but they have the handrails curved. And I said, you know, if you want to pay $100 million extra, we should put curved handrails in. Some weird things. They gave us a site for a depot that was too small. They just hadn't thought this through. This was their Canadian consultants who were actually freight railway consultants. This is the expressway, tracks down the middle of the expressway, turn off the tracks into the depot sidings. Well, yes, but the sidings were for 4-car trains. And they said they're building all the stations for 8-car trains. So we said, well, we're only going to run 4-car trains initially. So it's okay with us, but you are going to have a problem in 20 years when you want to run an 8-car train, because by then, this is all going to be built up with skyscrapers. We really think you should give us a site for a depot now that is big enough for 8-car trains. So they're now busy buying. It took about a year, maybe 2, to get this message across, but they're now buying the land and displacing the houses so we can fit 8-car trains in the depot. The second thing is the trains had to come out of the expressway and down into the depot, but they're in the middle of the expressway, so somebody has to go over something. And they said, oh no, you can have a level crossing, this is light rail. Well, yeah, light rail you do it, like trams, like go to Croydon. And I said, but this isn't carrying 20,000 passengers a day, this is 300,000 passengers a day. This is 8-car, call them whatever you want, guys. These are metro trains, and if you're going to have 20 metro trains coming out between 5:30 and 7 in the morning, there's not going to be a lot of traffic on the expressway. So they've now changed the design, and again, it took about 2 years to persuade them. They're going to have the expressway go over the railway. What's next? Bus integration. They've said it's up to us to do bus integration. We've said you should be building stations. We've sort of come to a compromise where we've agreed there's some money. We have to pay them rent. Rather than pay them rent, we can use some of the money to build bus facilities at stations and so on. And we've also got the rights. They said it's their job, the Transit Authority's job, to set up a multimodal fare and Oyster card system. We said, that's great, we'd love you to do it. If you haven't done it within 6 months of this such and such a date, we can set it up and everybody can join it. So, and I think it's probably going to end up being us doing it. We would rather they do it because it's a lot of work, and we will have to set it up in a way that's fair and so on. But and we're going to have, you know, like an Oyster card system, a clever fare by distance system with discounts for off-peak travel and this kind of stuff, capping and all those sorts of things, because it'll raise us the most money too. Power station, not such a big deal. That's $25 million will get you a power station. And since we're getting the trains, we're saving $100 million on the trains because they're electric. The $25 million for the cost of the power station, it's a no-brainer. We didn't have to do the analysis. If it was between buying new electric trains at a power station and buying new diesel trains, you'd have to do quite a complicated discounted cash flow. But once we found out we could get the trains from Toronto so cheaply, it's under construction. That's actually, I said, about $400 million for the infrastructure. That's columns under construction. I think the beams are actually down in place on it, so you can see it. I said 8 kilometers, it's almost finished. Lots of participants. Of course, this is meant to impress. But these are our technical partners. GE is doing the signaling, and they're managing the rolling stock, the refurbishment of the Toronto cars. Investec are our bankers. My company is FCP. we should update this a bit more on south of the Wars are now called SNR Den. Vera Capital is Dan Lighty's company, the guy who I first met. URS, they used to be Scott Wilson. Again, you know, project's been going on long enough, the names keep changing. SDG, you probably heard of the Transport Planners. The main reason we got them, I've known them for years, is they were actually already doing work for Lagos State, so they already had a lot of data available that we could put the PD back on. And we have our Nigerian Mars UBO, who, and then we've got all these banks which are, some are really private sector, some are sort of quasi-private sector. I mean, the International Finance Corporation is part of the World Bank. Some of them are owned by, I mean, FBN Capital is real private sector, Access, GT Bank. I think Harif is, I think it's managed by Macquarie, or maybe it's Trevant. It's managed by Macquarie, but it uses funds from the South African State Employees Pension Fund, which is required to invest some proportion of their pensions in infrastructure in Africa. So it's private, but it's not there because that was the best investment they could find. It's there because it's required to invest in that sector, so, which is fair enough. I mentioned the contract structure. LAMAT is the transit authority, really the state government. This is with the contractor, and this is with us. And that's the concluding quote. So, any questions?
What's the cost of the ride on that? Has that been worked out yet? Is it
as much as I can get from you.
Is it affordable for everybody, or
Yes,
is it quite expensive like the Delhi metro?
Our intention is that we will have a market-oriented pricing system where the fare will vary by time of day, by direction, by the distance you're traveling, by how much else you use it, much as your Oyster fare does. Our forecast modeling is that the fares will be competitive with the existing DAMFOs. And our research, SDG's research, was that people travel between, people spend between 50 cents and $2 making trips now to work, quite often with 3 or 4 legs. So we'll have, we intend to charge sort of similar fares to that.
So that's the concession is allowed to set a fare structure.
We are capped. I've got to be careful because it's not public exactly how we're capped, but there is a capping mechanism which stops us. We are capped effectively on the total fare we charge on average across the whole system per passenger kilometer. Okay, so we can't charge. The fare capping mechanism that actually I devised and persuaded them to adopt encourages us to maximize usage of the system. Just a simple cap was too dumb, because they said there's no incentive for me to offer cheap off-peak fares. So we are capped instead on a mechanism that says we can charge higher peak fares, provided we also persuade people to travel off-peak on much lower fares. But the whole average is capped at that level relating to a general rise in incomes. Okay. Now obviously the project's got to be financeable. Bankers want to see a revenue stream that they're going to be happy with for 30 years too. But that's the structure. If you got any better ideas, that's the structure I could come up with that would both get us the most money and get the most drivers. Because what the state wants to see is the trains to be full, and this gives us an incentive to get the train, to keep the trains full all the time, basically. Okay. Yeah.
Regarding the BRT system that was already in place, you mentioned they have already an implementation of the BRT. The forecast for the implementation of that BRT, can you see now if actually is in total use, is full? They have full buses and they came with this light rail system. And my question is, if the system, the current system is full, and now they want to have the metro, is it expected to be full as well at the first day open? How accurate is this analysis of the traffic forecast?
Okay, we're expecting 300,000 passengers a day on the east-west line in the first few years. But that only works out to about 10,000 people per hour at any point on the line in the peak hour. So we'll be running at about a quarter of or a sixth of the ultimate capacity. We're building it for 8-car trains, 200 meter long. These are really big cars, by the way. These are 25-meter cars. They're 3.1 meters wide. They're bigger than the trains in Beijing and a third longer. They're the size of the biggest cars in Hong Kong or New York.
I will reformat my question is, perhaps my question was different. Is the people happy using the BRT? And is expected that people being happy using a metro system? There are, for example, an example in Kuala Lumpur. There are several lines, and people are still using cars. And it's been very difficult to get the people to leave the cars and use the transport system.
We're not expecting to get many people out of their cars. 70 to 80% of trips in Lagos are made by public transport now, and we're expecting that traffic to shift to metro. The roads are full. Even with the expressway being rebuilt, there's not going to be a lot of extra road capacity. There's not a lot of extra parking capacity. I think one of the things I want to do is persuade them to actually put restrictions on construction of new parking, which they don't seem to understand, but then few cities do. That if you build car parks, you've just generated more traffic, because the traffic is obviously, but you have to have the metro in place so you can say there's an alternative that doesn't mean squeezing onto a minibus. We're basically expecting to transfer the traffic off the Danfos onto our trains. We're expecting that we'll be competitive in price and quality with the Danfos, and that the minibus drivers will find other routes. That they will feed our stations, and that's one of the things we're going to do with our fares, is that we're intending to invite them to join our fare collection system. So the Danfo operator, driving in the neighborhood, we'll go past your house, you'll get on, you'll touch your card to his little thing, you can now buy an off-the-shelf GPS-enabled 3G Oyster card reader, chip card reader, and it will record that this person's car got on this minibus here, 10 minutes later got on a station, rode our train, got off the station at the other end. The total trip is, say, a 3-zone trip, so we're going to take $2 off the money that's in the bank, because we don't want to touch cash either. Not when you see what Naira looks like. We want people who have topped up over the internet or the bank themselves or by phone or with a scratch card or something. And then we'll give the Danfo operator 20% of what we got for the whole trip. So that at the end of the day, he'll go to a petrol station and they'll say, oh yeah, you got $100 or $80 today or whatever, and he can fill up his Danfo and he's happy too. He's not had to hand up cash. And we've offered an integrated journey that was commercially attractive. Because one of the things you want to do with your pricing is you actually want to make the feeder trip free to the customer, because they're the most likely people to pay the highest fare are the ones who live and work right next to the station. The ones who actually will want to pay less and are more likely to drive or take a bus all the way are the ones who have to make a feeder trip, an L-shaped journey rather than a direct journey. So this technology gives us the ability to do that. I don't think anybody in the world has ever taken advantage of it in that way. And this is one of the great things about Lagos, is it's almost a clean slate. I can do it right, and I can use this technology in a way that's never been used before that I'm pretty sure will work. And everybody I explain it to says, yeah, that would be great. Could you do it in another city that's already existing? No, because they already have their fare structures. You're dealing with legacies. Anyway, sorry, go on. I've got another question.
Oh, I want to ask a question actually directly based on that. So my research is about how cities collaborate in building these public transport systems. So I looked at South African cities to see how they went in Bogota, and part of the research also touched on the relationship between South African cities and Lagos in building their BRT. And I was wondering, flip the question around, if in your work you have done any other, if there have been any opportunities to learn from or collaborate with other African cities, concessions, for example, the Gautrain in Johannesburg, or any other projects, if there have been any opportunities to do that, and particularly on the fare card, like Cape Town has I'm not sure but an EMV card like that, and just introduced it with the taxis.
And Durban.
Yeah, and I didn't know if maybe that was an opportunity where you've worked together and collaborated.
Nobody here from Lagos city government, right? State government. I'm very skeptical about the capability or willingness of government bureaucrats to collaborate on international scale. Maybe the TfL guys learn from other cities, but I work with the guys in Toronto Transit, and they don't even seem to know what Montreal's doing very well. These are career bureaucrats who spent a whole lot doing it the way they did it, kept doing it, finding reasons to say why they can't change it. You do get dynamic people like in maybe in Bogota, and, you know, who learn and apply things. And the Lagos people never seem to hesitate to get a trip to go to Bogota that's paid for by the World Bank, and they get to do the shopping and visit their kids in university in the States and London along the way. But do I honestly see any evidence that they've applied any lessons in the BRT here? No. We as a concessionaire learn those lessons. I've talked to the Standard Bank people who have the Durban system. They're running the complete fare collection system. And as soon as I have a signed concession agreement, I'm going to go back to them and say, okay, now let's sit down and see how you can give me a complete solution on the fares. So all I do is tell you the fare policy every day or every month I want you to apply. You sell all the tickets, you maintain all the machines, and you run all of that for me. And see what kind of pricing you can be. And that's how I'm going to learn from Durban. I've met the How Train guy who's running it, who's a smart guy. It's a little different operation. There are hardly any passives on it. But, you know, if I can persuade him to move to Lagos and be operations director for the first couple of years, they might do it. So there's that kind of exchange, but I think it works far better in the private sector than in the public sector. I've got lots of friends in the public sector, don't get me wrong. One of my fellow directors of FCP was the managing director of the Jubilee Line, London Underground, and he was their person on their benchmarking thing. But, you know, I think it's commercially driven is the way to make those kind of connections. We would get the Toronto trains. Would you ever see a public authority go and get trains from Toronto that were 30 years old? They don't look 30 years old. They, you know, you can't tell them apart from the new trains unless you know what to look for. But no public authority would touch that with a barge pole. So.
Sorry, I was wondering, do you think the Lagos has the institutional capacity to deliver successfully the metro system, considering the political uncertainty that surrounds the state? For example, the PPP government, which is the government power at the federal level, has been trying to capture Lagos State. And generally, the antecedent shows that when a different political party comes into power, they kind of bring in their own people and their own ideas. Do you think there's institutional sustainability in Lagos State?
Yeah, definitely. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it. I mean, we meet the governor regularly at meetings. He's committed to it. His party has, what, 70% of the vote or something? You know, don't ask too many questions about the transport unions, but I don't think he's corrupt. I think he's in it to make a better city. I don't think he's in it to line his pockets. I think there's probably more chance that he'll be. There's more chance he'll run for president in the next election.
Vice president.
Vice president? Okay. I went around Toronto with him, and some lobbyist guys turned up from Washington to meet him. And I'm going, why are they meeting him? He's going to run for president next. So I think that's more likely than PDP winning Lagos state government.
Yeah, because at the moment, the PDP, the ruling party, putting a lot of funds in trying to capture Lagos from the opposition.
Yeah.
Without Lagos, ruling Nigeria was ruling London without actually having a majority in London. That's what it implies. So I was wondering if, for example, let's say that the PDP come 2015 becomes the ruling party in Lagos, would they come with a new idea in terms of probably put it as being maybe concession agreement, kind of try to renegotiate it? Would that be a problem?
Well, we have to, regardless of which party is in power, I have to write the concession agreement, which is about 400 pages long. We've negotiated on the basis, and I've said this to the negotiating, the people on the other side. We have these meetings in Lagos with 40 people around the room, 5 law firms, bankers, engineers. I say, I know one of two things is going to happen when we open and start running this. Either we're going to go bust pretty quickly, which is what happened in Kuala Lumpur and Bangkok, and you're not going to feel sorry for us, and the state's going to take it over and run it, and you're going to lose all our money. Or we're going to make money, in which case you're going to spend the next 25 years trying to figure out how to squeeze the profits away from us. And that's the behavior that you have to just accept, and you'd accept it actually, unfortunately, in England too. So we have to write a very robust contract. And beyond that, we're reliant that there is a rule of law in Nigeria. And in general, you've got oil companies, you've got 20,000 expats there. There's obviously lots of corruption, but international contracts are generally respected. And you have appeal in the international courts. We will. You saw the names of the IFC. We'll have the Exim Bank of the U.S. and those sorts of organizations involved in it. And you know, the Minister of Finance, whatever we may think of the PPP generally, the Minister of Finance, she's a good person. I mean, you know, I met her, and she's you know, there's a lot of good people in Nigeria. There's some not so good people too, like anywhere. So you've got to be an optimist in this business. If you're not, you better get out of it.
Yeah, my question was sort of piggybacked on that one, was in that you said that you persuaded the banks that there was an acceptable political risk.
Yeah.
Are those the arguments you used to the bank, or did they take some persuading that that the political risk was acceptable?
Political risk isn't really my job, actually. I mean, the first thing you say is, we want to finance a private sector mass transit system. The first people say, but I thought they all lose money, right? Because that's what everybody in the world thinks. And after you've persuaded them to stick around for that, then you say, oh, and by the way, it's in Lagos, Nigeria. Anybody who's still left in the room, you know, but seriously, our Nigerian backer, I didn't mention, our main backer is involved in the Lekki Expressway toll road, which is, I guess, a success. They've rebuilt the existing road out to the east, charged tolls, put up toll barriers. The road, everyone says the road's fantastic, but they really hate having to pay tolls. Well, I'm sorry, guys, but the people are paying the tolls now. And I think people are happy to see a road that works in Nigeria.
Yeah, but they are paying the tolls, but the road hasn't been completed and the tolls have been charged already.
That was the deal.
Providing alternative routes.
That's right. I understand what's the deal. The state has also not fulfilled lots of its commitments. The state was supposed to move power lines out. You know, one thing you know is that the state will never deliver on all of its commitments in these concessions. You want to avoid getting yourself in a situation where you're politically exposed. I think what's been happening is initially they weren't charging tolls, and the state was just simply paying the tolls to the operator. They must have. I don't know the details, but we have a concession agreement, and it's got obligations on the state to deliver us the track and infrastructure in a certain way, and then we have our obligations. And hopefully it'll be a happy relationship, and everyone will do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, it's just bankers are not always easily persuaded.
No, but strangely enough, political risk, you have to get political risk insurance.
Sure. Yeah.
And that costs a lot of money. Mm. But you know, once you have that in place, if you look at what's it called, Overseas Private Investment Corporation, there's a multilateral.
The MIGA.
MIGA. That's right. If you look at MIGA, it turns out they never have to pay out, because once you have MIGA, countries make sure they don't break the rules.
Yeah,
that's crazy enough. So anyway, sorry.
You talked about the dual type of contract, whereby the state ideally should look after the infrastructure, and the concessionaire does its, or the private sector does its on the concessionaire side. I mean, if you look at the heavy rail, say, situation in the UK, Network Rail is effectively a sort of state-run body, and you've got private companies running the trains. I mean, is that not a...
It's similar.
Has it been... What, I mean, you said it sounded from what you were saying that was kind of a new thing in the metro sector, but has it not been existing for a while?
Well, sort of. If you look at Croydon Tramlink, Midland Metro, Manchester Metrolink, Bangkok Metro, Kuala Lumpur, these were vertically integrated concessions. And they said, here's a line, you build the whole line, you finance the whole thing, and you run it for 25 years and get your money back. And what went wrong, there were about 4 or 5 reasons those were wrong. First of all, they were just simply too expensive to finance privately. The fares can support the operation of the trains, but they usually can't support the infrastructure. The second is it's very hard to agree up front exactly what infrastructure will be acceptable, because it's going through city property, streets, sewers have to be moved and all that. And if it's got tunneling involved, the contractual risk is really high. So contractors, it's very hard to do that. The next one is that you need a consortium to do that, because the guys that make trains and hire train drivers are not the same people as the people who build tunnels. Once you build a consortium together, you get the channel tunnel situation where they're all as much concerned with robbing each other as delivering product. So they just become unfinanceable. This model, the compromise on this model is that, the stations aren't exactly where I'd like them. there's one station, I don't think we need it all. And we said to them, you don't need that station. And this station got 2 entrances. And we said, why are you building both entrances? Oh, because our traffic forecasts say you need it. I said, our traffic forecasts say you don't need it for 30 years. And you could save $10 million by not building the other entrance. Oh, but we'll need it eventually. It'll cost more to add it later. I said, no, it isn't. This isn't under Oxford Street. This is over an expressway. It's a no-brainer to build this in 30 years when we need it. I said, if we need it, we'll build it in 10 years. And so, those sorts of iterations. But those are pretty minor hiccups, they've adjusted the platform height to match our train. We figured out where the gate line is, things like that. I didn't get to pick the color of the station, but if I felt really strongly that they should be blue instead of beige, I guess they'd probably agree to it. That's why the verticals, I'd rather be God in a perfect world and get to decide everything. But I think I've accepted that this is a good way to split it. Okay. Yeah.
What impact on physical development would you expect? You mentioned some skyscrapers near the depot. Is there any sort of sense of TOD?
Oh, well, yeah, all along the line, everywhere there are sites, everywhere that there's land around the stations, I envisage there'll be pressure for redevelopment. In many of the areas, it's very fragmented, the land, but there are some very large parcels of land. The guys who own, it's called Volkswagen? I didn't say it, but it's Volkswagen. It's not Volkswagen, it's Volkswagen. Is that right?
No, Volkswagen.
Okay, you call it Volkswagen, but other people call it Volkswagen. That's all. So I try to say it the way they. And it hasn't made cars in 30 years or 20 years, right? Because they found it impossible to make cars proper. But it's a big site, and it's right next to one of our stations. And this would make a great mall. And you could build not that I like malls, but I think compared for Lagos, this would be a great thing to have a great big shopping mall with a bunch of 30-story apartment towers, with air conditioning run off of our generator from our power system, and it'd be it would be good. And I see that happening all along the line. And the geography of the place is really good. It is not it's a sprawling city, but it can't sprawl much. It's squeezed into these corners, so yeah.
You said there that you're building a power station. Have you allowed for linkages into your network of energy supply for these up-and-coming communities that will spring up around the stations? Have you put together a strategy that has thought about that, or are you just...
Not really. We're building a 25 megawatt power station, which is what we need to sort of run it for the 25 years. So we'll have extra power in the beginning, we'll have more power late at night when we're not running as many trains. We're not really in the electricity business, but we'll have some extra power, and we'll probably link into the grid. And as the electricity, which is also being reformed in Nigeria, will electricity in Nigeria work in 25 years? What do you think? I'd like to think so. Yeah, I'd like to think in 25 years the lights are working, and then we're connected into the whole grid. So yeah.
Do you have to decommission that power station if you don't connect?
No. It's what? Yeah. Yeah. We're actually building one that, I think we're building one that runs off of oil. Doesn't have to be diesel oil, it can be any kind of oil. It can also run off the same things, they can run off of natural gas. They can burn almost anything except firewood, it seems. There are these they're designed for LNG tankers. Because when you have an LNG tanker, you have a lot of natural gas when you're full of gas, but when you run out of gas, you always carry some oil to burn, and the same things can run on both. So, and the gas is much cleaner, so hopefully we'll be switching to gas. So, but yeah, eventually I expect it'll be uneconomical. But the price difference isn't very much. It turns out 25 megawatt power station, 2.5 gigawatt power stations, not an enormous difference.
What is the perception of the political political view of Lagos? Are they now, because of this movement of metro, are they thinking now of building more lines, or they are preparing themselves? What is the perspective 5 years, 10?
I showed you the plan with 7 lines. They went and advertised. They've got another consortium that thinks they're going to build the red line. And I know one of the advisors working on it. He called me up. He said, because we actually bid for the red line, and we were awarded it too. And And then we found that they didn't have a route for it. You know, because they just run alongside the NRC tracks. And I said, how are you going to solve that? Oh, there's no problem. I said, okay, tell me. And then there was silence. So about a year ago, I got a call from a friend in South Africa with, I think it was with PwC. He said, we've just been appointed to do the business plan for the Red Line. Oh, I said, good luck. Make sure you get paid in advance. Because I see no evidence that they'll ever sort out the alignment until they have, you know, relations which are good with the federal government. And meanwhile, they advertise for the Green Line and the Orange Line, which I look at the map and I say, but they must be in tunnel. Well, you know, if they can barely afford to build this expressway and this line, those lines aren't going to happen for a while. So they will, you know. Sorry.
Sorry, I think the political calculation is that by 2015, probably the opposition party will be in federal government.
Yeah.
So hopefully there will be a relation between the Lagos State and the ruling party. Federal government.
That would be nice.
I think that's what our plan is, because at the moment they've announced a series of political changes, a series of measures forming a mega political party, which involves all the opposition parties.
ACN's merged with the other.
They are merging with the CGC and Kafka from the East.
Yeah.
So basically what they are doing is they are looking for a candidate that will unify the country.
Yeah, yeah.
So-called unify the country.
So Fishola is going to be vice president, do you think?
Most likely, because the difficult calculation is that the Southerners have been in government for the past 14 years.
So he can't be president.
He can't be president.
So who's going to be president? Buhari?
So they are looking for a new. Buhari is definitely not going to be president because he's going to be 70, I think 71 or so. So they are looking for a candidate. Probably El Rufai, I'm not 100% sure. I'm not sure of that. But the political calculation is opposition parties going to be in government in 2015. The country itself are fed up of the People's Democratic Party ruling government, which they haven't done anything for the past 14 years.
Yeah.
The infrastructure still remains the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
No major road network.
Yeah.
Since they came to power. Yeah. So what's the point of putting them back into power? And there's this new orientation. People are getting to know that there's no point in receiving, bribery, money, thousands of rights to vote for the person that will come into government that delivering.
Yeah, yeah.
And Lagos State government, they actually delivering.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
People can't actually see it themselves. They can see the new development. For example, the new rail system that will come to first probably next 2014 towards the end.
That's right. Well, we won't have trains running until for 3 more years from now. Because it's taken so long for them to get the rest of the expressway running, basically. But still, you're right. We'll have something running before the election. We'll have a train running back and forth. And that would be very important, right? Symbolically,
In one of your slides, you said you're going to build on the experience from other cities. I'm just looking at that there. That looks very familiar to Perth Metro.
Yeah. Perth is a slightly different city, but
yeah, it was a highway on both sides as well. Just wondering, did you look at Perth, or did you take any lessons from Perth?
No, I know Perth because I tried to buy the freight railway company there. But Perth is a super rich city where everybody's got 3 cars. And I mean, Toronto, Chicago, lots of cities have got, San Francisco have expressways with metros down the middle of them. And, it's an easy place to build a metro. It's also not through the middle of the community usually. We didn't pick the route, remember. They picked the route. We just figured out we could live with it. And as for the other lines, the red line, the yellow line, the green line, the more they get built, the better, because they generate feeder traffic onto our line. Every additional line feeds our network. They don't compete with us, so we'd like the other lines to be built. I'm deeply skeptical because I know that the orange line and the yellow line have to be in deep tunnel, and in Lagos that's going to cost zillions. And the red line, even if the federal government is on side, they're still going to have to address all the level crossings. They're going to have to basically lower the whole line into cutting, I think, which is a multi-billion-dollar project that nobody has got their mind around. I mean, you don't 4-track a surface railway through a city of 10 million people and run trains every 2 minutes up and down on it with level crossings. There are a few bridges, but there's quite a few. At Ikeja, there are level crossings.
Yeah.
And I said, what about that level crossing? He said, oh, we're going to close that one down. I said, you can't close that one down. That's the whole way from Ikeja into the community. I said, you'll have a revolution if you do that. And there's several places along the line, and they can depress the line. And likewise, in fact, with freight trains. It's the main railway from the port of Lagos, which is the biggest port in West Africa, to the interior of Nigeria. Okay, they haven't been running any trains for 25 years, but they should be. And when they do start running a train every 10 minutes with a container train, it'll be like, everybody know about the corridor, the Alameda corridor in Los Angeles? Next piece of infrastructure. You're going to have a train every 15 minutes, a half-mile-long container train coming out of the port, going right through the middle of Lagos. And it's going to cause traffic chaos. So they've got that, there's... The great thing about this was there is a corridor, it's convincing, it's credible, it's got traffic, so it's doable. Yeah, sorry.
Hi, just to follow up on a question, on a comment you made about everyone thinks that these projects don't make money. I'm wondering which ones do make money and what the right context is for that.
Well, most of them do make money where people try, are allowed to try. Most of the commuter rail operations in London make money. Most of the metro lines cover their operating costs, and a good number of them cover a good part of their capital costs. Obviously, Hong Kong makes lots of money, not just from property, although the property is used as a dowry to pay for the infrastructure. Dubai operates very profitably. Usually they're embedded in a bigger public organization where a combination of political decisions keep fares low and pay staff more than they need to and run them inefficiently. All of those things mean they lose money. But if you don't have those things, you can make money doing it. Not enough to pay for the whole capital cost. We couldn't finance the infrastructure. The red line, you could potentially finance the infrastructure. But then you have a problem with the risks. The risks are so high that people, private sector wants to see a 15 or 20% return on their capital.
15, 20%?
Yeah. Well, would you invest your pension in it for anything less than that?
In the long term, yes.
No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't.
Probably doing it now.
No, you wouldn't. You would go nuts if they were risking your future on a Lagos metro project.
No, pension fund earns 15 to 20%.
That's what they only get where they get. The only way they get 8% is by putting something at 15%, the risky one.
I'm really intrigued because the world you're presenting is the real world, and it's a world. And I'm incredibly intrigued with at the one level, the project, understandably, is being presented just as a transport project, which is fine at one level, but then I think someone asked the question, in effect, which is an area that we're interested in as well, is what agent of change powers do you anticipate this having? People talked about property developers as an ad hoc thing, but there's if I was a pension fund, that's where I'd be looking for my profits, not from the railway line, but actually from the land property around it. But anyway, that's another discussion. But I'm just kind of intrigued because at one level, understandably, because that's where your entry point is, it's just a transport project. And the other level, the potential for wealth creation, whether it's real estate or whether it's agent of change, is huge, because it's a very productive city, notwithstanding its constraints. The other level, I'm just trying to put the pieces together, maybe I misunderstood you. Other level, the capacity of government is praised, and one, I'm just confused, and the other level it's claimed to be incompetent. And I suspect both are true, because you've probably got leadership of few leaders who are competent, but then you actually haven't got
They're not incompetent, but everybody's struggling. Everybody's at the limit of their capabilities.
Right. Okay.
They're conscientious. They're good people.
Okay.
Sometimes I think that they should spend a bit more time on Wikipedia learning about other systems, because I find that it's right there. They got internet access. They could learn about it too.
Yeah. But what we're trying to say is that the public sector is not quite up to it. The private sector is. This is basically what. Then I am struggling with this because this is the reality, and that's why I'm trying to be as articulate as I can. Then was asked about political risk, and was said, no, political risk is being coped for by insurance companies. But we've seen the global financial system collapse on the basis of false confidence.
No, it's not dealt with by insurance companies. It's dealt with by MIGA, which simply is a World Bank guarantee that the governments will respect the contracts and won't confiscate your investment. And once you have MIGA, governments, from experience, don't confiscate investments and do respect contracts.
Well, I would just say...
They can't afford to be on the blacklist.
I would just say watch that space, because the global economy is changing so fast that what's been held in the past. But that's not the main point. You're saying that political risk is accommodated, and yet the risk factors must be huge. And however, and this is in history, we've seen this, it's not just your project, we've seen entrepreneurs come in, make things happen against all the odds, right? And this is and I'm just interested in the chemistry, in what makes pioneers like yourself go ahead, think that the risks are manageable, take all these on, because if you analyse them, they almost seem overwhelming, and yet things happen. And that's the real world I see in it. You could, on the other hand, look back and say all the risks. We do a cost-benefit analysis of this. We do this. And, oh no, we're not going to touch it, right? So that's the other way of doing it. I'm just intrigued. I'm interested in, apart from the fake forecast. I'm not saying they're fake forecasts, but apart from using fake forecasts to justify projects, or aid being put in for political reasons. What is it that actually makes the economic rationale stand up? Because political change overnight.
Political risk insurance doesn't protect us about the other party being elected. That's not what it protects. It protects us that the government, whatever government there is in Mogo, will adhere to the rule of law and will respect the letter of our contract. Okay?
No, there's no guarantee that will happen anyway.
No, if they don't respect the letter of our contract, we can go to court in a specified, which is actually going to be a court, I think in Paris or London, under Nigerian law, but in the courts of England, and sue them for the money they owe us. And if they breach the contract, if they give us infrastructure late, or they don't have that many obligations to give us, by the way, in the future. It's more that if they decide that there's a new tax on public transport, like I said, they introduce a new public tax that's 20%. They're perfectly entitled to do that, by the way. They just have to compensate us for the tax. But if they don't compensate us for the tax, we can go to court and say, you said you wouldn't introduce a new tax like this, and you did, and you have to pass the money for it. That's what.
Okay, I'll conclude, because I know it's a difficult question, maybe awkward even. I am genuinely intrigued how entrepreneurs enter into this field and historically have proven some gone bankrupt, and yet their infrastructure is a legacy which has gone on to make more profits. So that's very important here. But let me just ask you one last question. To expect 20% rate of return, is that partly the answer here? Is it partly that you're getting risk takers coming in, taking a higher rate of return? 20% is very high. And that's the basic. So if it goes belly up, at least you've made it 20%.
Well, no, if it goes belly up, you don't get nothing. No, you have to aim for a target sort of 20% IRR. If it goes belly up, if day one, if the traffic is 20% less than we expect, or if costs are 20% higher than we expect, we get no return. We go broke, okay? Which is what happened in Bangkok. Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur each got new metro systems paid for by private investors at no cost to the taxpayer, and they're very happy. In other cases, in Manila, I think it's MRT3, the guy's making, I don't know, I don't think anyone knows, but he's probably making 25 or 30%. If the traffic is higher than we're expecting, and I'm able to pay the drivers a little less than I'm figuring on, rather than more, we'll make more than 20%.
Is there any government guarantees of guaranteeing you under circumstances?
There are certain.
So is it, if it goes belly up,
No. If the costs are higher than we expect, we don't have any protection. We're taking full cost risk, and we're taking a big chunk of traffic risk. Okay, as it should be. So why do I do it? I do it because it's fun. I don't know how not to do it. It's what I like doing. And we're able to construct the deal that the bankers are persuaded will give us a good return. I think it's interesting comparing the different ways you deliver these things. I think in Nigeria, I've not met anybody who said this should be done in the public sector, because their experience with the public sector is that you'd end up with a whole bunch of trains rusting. Well, it'd be like Edinburgh, actually. There'd be a whole bunch of trams that didn't fit on the tracks and some half-finished stations and some trains. In China, on the other hand, it would be done in the public sector. It would probably be running. The escalators might not work like they did in, where was it, where they had the escalator accident? But actually that was run by MTR.
We had it in London.
Yeah, in London. I mean, it's different. There's different situations in different countries, and I think we've provided. I'm really proud. I think that the public, of the innovation we're able to provide on the fare integration. I think we'll do a really good job of that. We don't. There's no free land. It's not like Hong Kong where they could say that island is yours. You can build all the apartment buildings you want. So there's no dowries available like that. It would be nice if they could. If I could find 30 acres of state-owned land on the route they could give us as a dowry, that would change the economics fantastically. There's some military areas maybe the federal government will be able to give us in the future. But I do see us being a catalyst of development, and we will do everything to try to catalyze it. We will do everything to get somebody to build a big building off the end of each one of these bridges, because it'll generate riders for us. Now, how active we will be, I don't know. I mean, Vancouver, the Transit Authority, was an active advocate of it, but the development was done by others. But you know Vancouver, the development that's happening on SkyTrain, and hopefully it'll do far more. Anyway.
Last question.
Exhausted, everybody? You all come on this?
What's more important then? To make money or to get lots of people travelling by public transport?
Or have fun? Sorry, well, if you don't make money, you don't get to do it again. So you have to find, you don't get to do it at all. So we have to make, I have to design this to make money, but we've devised a fair regulatory regime which incentivizes us to do both, I think. So that makes me feel good. Besides the fact that we make the most money if we also carry the most people. And you know, one of the disadvantages of the British fair regulatory regime, the National Rail one, is it doesn't actually explicitly, it wasn't explicitly designed to do that, although it does seem to be doing that. The ridership is up, the ridership has doubled, and the fare revenue's gone up. And the average fare in Britain has gone down. So that's a good outcome. My bankers will want to make the most money. They won't care. But I think I can persuade the state government to let me make even more money if I can convince them that it will also maximize the ridership. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Anyway, it all sounds good.
Well, I think in a way I encourage 2 rounds of claps, and I'm being very serious here. One round of clap would be for the presentation. And the other round is actually to meet an entrepreneur that puts his money where his ideas are. You know, whatever precautions and any skepticism, I have to personally, I have to, because I read stuff historically, as you do, I have to say we don't often meet people like Michael that actually does that. So I'm not asking you to clap twice, but let's make it doubly loud. Thank you very much.